Welcome to the DRF Sports Podcast, brought to you by DRF Sports. America's most trusted name in horse racing is now providing sports bettors with exclusive data, analytics, previews, videos, and expert picks on all major sports. Bet smarter and have more fun doing it. It's the DRF Sports Podcast, and now your host, Sheldon Alexander. Ready, set, bet.
This is the DRF Sports Podcast, episode 43. Make sure you like and follow wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Sheldon Alexander, and we're heading into the Divisional Round, looking to continue the good times after a 5-1 wild card weekend. And so many prop wins on top of that, and we want more from the playoffs. But first, be a pro and win with DRF Sports Pro. Introducing DRF Sports' all-new premium data feature on drf.com/sports. For $99 a year, which is just $8.25 a month, you can get industry-leading betting trends, angles, and analytics. With the playoffs here, it's the best way for you to make some money this postseason and have fun while doing it. That's DRF Sports Pro. Sign up now at drf.com/sports. And hopefully we can keep up with the pro picks here as well on the pod, as we do this twice a week. On Fridays, it's a picks pod, and on Tuesdays, we recap the week that was. So, of course, today being Friday, we're looking for winners. Some big boy matchups on the sched as the playoffs continue. And, of course, we've got more props and betting angles for you. And my guy, Matt Russell, is here to break it all down as we head into the weekend. And luckily for you, that starts right about now. Well, after a 5-1 week and so many prop wins, Mr. Matt Russell is back, of course, because we got more dubs to get to. Mr. Matt Russell, how are you feeling so far? And I'm going to be honest, I'm not even going to let you answer. I want to get right to it because that's how fired up I am for divisional weekend here.
Right.
Let's go. Bengals at Titans. Titans, 3.5-point favorites. I don't like the hook at all. I mean, of course not. But I feel like the Titans are playoff tested. I know that sounds like rah-rah narrative type things, but it matters if you've been in this position before. They know what they are. They know what they need to do from the coaching staff down. And they found ways to win all season. I'm leading Titans, but the half point makes me pause. What say you, Mr. Matt Russell?
I love that you're jumping right into this because there's only 4 games, but it doesn't matter because we could absolutely talk about each one of these games for an hour each, right? And now all of a sudden the podcast is 4 hours and I've dragged you right into the mud with me, especially after Wild Card Weekend where we had 6 games to talk about and we did so forever on Tuesday. Yeah, man, like the hook is the hook here in this game, right? We talked about this on Tuesday, the line moving from 2.5 to 3.5. And we talked about the comparisons and how this line, if this was a regular season game, should never be 3.5 or would never be 3.5. So here's the situation. The primary issue is what I call the Derrick Henry issue. And that's, okay, Derrick Henry's back, but then what, right? And why has this line kicked up? It has to be certainly in part because of Derrick Henry's return. Because if it isn't because of Derrick Henry's return, what is it? Is it because of a little extra home field advantage built into the line? Why would that necessarily be the case? It's not like Tennessee has some rocking home field advantage. They literally just lost their one home playoff game last year in a relatively weak effort against Baltimore where they scored 10 points early and then basically never again. And so I'm not building in a extra home field advantage to pump this thing over 3.5. Now we're starting to see Cincinnati's D-line maybe not as banged up as we thought it would be. Larry Ogunjobi is the one who is the key here. And it's funny, you listen to content and whatnot out there this week, and all of a sudden, like, everybody's on a first name basis with the old Larry, even though his last name is even more fun to say. So Ogunjobi goes out and everybody's like, oh, well, then now they have no chance to stop the run. Well, here's the thing. I broke this down a little bit this week over at the Score, but let's assume Derrick Henry's back and he's at full health. So, like, what's he going to do? What is the expectation for Derrick Henry? Well, as you know, the expectation is always Derrick Henry doing awesome stuff. And what's amazing about Derrick Henry isn't necessarily that he does awesome stuff. He does it so much, right? He carries the ball 25, 30 times. He puts up 180 rushing yards, something along those lines. and you go like, look at this guy, like nobody can stop him, right? And it's impressive because he's one of the only guys in the league who can do that on an individual basis. But if you look at the Titans from a team standpoint, their team rushing yards per game before Derrick Henry got hurt is actually lower than since he got hurt. So the team as a whole has actually run better since he got hurt, after, you'll recall the whole Adrian Peterson fiasco. Once they decided, hey, we got some young bucks back here, right? We obviously had Jeremy McNichols, but the addition of Deontay Foreman and Dontrell Hilliard, those three guys, they're not going to get you all excited because you're not going to pick them up in your fantasy league and have them carry you to a fantasy title. But if all those guys were just one human being, they've actually been more productive than Henry. And Henry's not amazing. The point is like he is three human beings in one from a usage standpoint, which is like headline worthy and sort of, billboard type worthy. But it doesn't really change anything for the Titans, right? They are still the team that runs the football a lot, runs it really well. They did it before Derrick Henry was out with an injury, and they did it after Derrick Henry was out with an injury. So why are we changing their rating? Why are we changing the point spread in this game? Because right now, maybe one guy, maybe two are out for Cincinnati on the D-line. But like, how well is Tennessee really going to do? They're going to do well no matter what from a running standpoint, right? The Cincinnati defense, if they are banged up, right? If they're missing a couple of guys, what do they become? Maybe they become the Texans defense, right? Not very good. Well, the Texans lost by 3 and beat the Titans this season. Maybe they become, some other team that the Titans lost to, like, I don't know, the Jets, something along those lines, right? So the point is like the Titans rating shouldn't change all that much because Derrick Henry is there. It's just more interesting for us to watch because it's one guy doing stuff instead of 3 guys. So I look at this and I go, I still don't get how we can get to 3.5 here because I'm not buying in on that. And I'm not buying in on the home field advantage. And so how does Tennessee get better? How does Tennessee all of a sudden have this rating as high as they do to be 3.5-point favorites? And again, I'm not, as we always say, I'm not saying it's some guarantee that Cincinnati is going to cover the game. I'm just saying when we're talking about probabilities here and we move through 3 to the other side, that means we're getting a better probability with that key number of 3 on Cincinnati, right? We are getting whatever percentage you think that is. I happen to think it's going to be there's a really, really good chance that Tennessee wins this game by exactly 3 points. Like in Mike Vrabel's sort of universe, right? Like, wouldn't he just love at the end of that game setting themselves up to definitely win, but just by 3 points, right? Like, not that he's trying to have it be a close game, but like if they're up 10, right, he's going to play, defense so that, okay, like as long as we can sort of let them slowly matriculate it down the field, even if we give up a touchdown with whatever time left, that's fine. Or as they're, getting, maybe it's a tie game, right? And some teams, the Chiefs of the world, the Buccaneers of the world, are stretching the field. They're trusting their quarterback. They're throwing the ball. They're trying to score a touchdown with the field goal being the backup plan. I've seen Mike Vrabel's work. This is a gentleman who will take the 45-yard field goal to win the game. Like, he will set the team up to do so. Why? Because again, he will run the football a lot. But 2, the alternative requires some real trust, some real faith in Ryan Tannehill. And that's what no one is talking about this week. It's all Derrick Henry's going to be back and like he's going to be able to run all over Cincinnati. But I'm here to tell you, when Tennessee has had big rushing games, whether that's with Henry or whether that's with the sort of 3-headed monster, 4-headed would you include Tannehill because he has to be accounted for in the running game as well. They're actually only 4-3 this season when rushing for over 175 yards. So it's like, great. They run. It's like, pick one of those games, right? Oh, they ran it down blank's throats and they ran for days and 200 yards rushing and all of that sort of thing. And then you ask yourself, did they win or did they lose? And 4 out of 7 times the answer is they won, but 3 out of 7 times the answer is they lost. And we're not even requiring them to lose this game. We are just requiring them to win this game by 3 points or less, have this be a close game. So I just look at it and I go, the way that the Titans play, where they are sort of just, listen, I like the Titans as an underdog. If they win this game, I'll be very interested in them next week against whomever they play between Kansas City and Buffalo, especially being at home. It'll be interesting to see where those lines are. But as a favorite, regular season or playoffs, I just don't know how you have sort of any kind of faith in Tennessee to build a lead, be aggressive enough to build a lead, have the defense hold up to keep that lead, and then sort of cutthroat it at the end of the game where you are not worried about a backdoor. You're not having to deal with some sort of backdoor situation against Joe Burrow and the Bengals. And listen, I don't have that much to say about the Bengals because we know what the Bengals are, right? Joe Mixon, Jamar Chase, Burrow, right? All of those guys. We know what they are. We have a pretty good idea of what their rating is.
My question for you is, my biggest question about this game, we know that the Titans, it's going to be based in the trenches, right? This is what they're going to do. It's that smash mouth, what we've seen in playoffs past, right? They're built for the playoffs.
Yes.
Can the Bengals do the same thing? Like, can they, win the battle in the trenches to keep the game close enough? That's kind of my question. And you mentioned about their D-line and, the possible missing pieces there, but even on offense, can they ball control it enough? Or, what you just said, I agree with you. The most likely scenario is no matter what, even if I like the Titans to win this game, are they going to pull away? Can they stop just the air attack of, okay, well, the Bengals are like, we just got to throw the ball now. And can you just stop that air attack and stop the backdoor cover?
Yeah.
I don't see the Bengals winning this game. I don't see the Bengals winning this game, but I also don't know how much I'm willing to lay points on Tennessee over a field goal.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of where I'm getting at, where I don't want the money line. I haven't, I'm not sitting here banging the table here for the Bengals money line here. Fundamentally, this just comes down to the move across 2.5 to 3.5, and what that, the probabilities of Tennessee winning this game by 3 are higher in my belief, and again, this might either be proven true. It requires Tennessee to win by exactly 3 for me to be proven correct. So it's not that easy. But my point is like, if normally the probability of a 3.5 point favorite winning by 3 was like 7%, I kind of think it's like closer to 15%, right? So I think you are getting an extra 5, 6, 7% of probability. Obviously those are sort of just made up numbers, but you know what I mean, right? Like you are adding that probability by having that number cross 2.5 all the way over to 3.5. Whereas from a money line standpoint, I think the money line, the price is about right, because I think that probability is the same as the money line indicates. And as far as the offense is going to go, I'm looking forward to seeing how the Bengals sort of approach this, because the strength of the Titans is the defensive line, right? Where they can rush the quarterback. Obviously, the Bengals offensive line, not particularly great. How are the Bengals going to attack that? Are they going to load up on blockers and, sort of do a 2 wide receiver set type of a thing where it's like, we need to protect, maybe hope that Joe Mixon can get going on the ground game? Or are they going to go the other way? And are they just going to go, you know what? 5 wide receivers. Let's just get crazy here. Let's let Burrow, Burrow, when he gets blitzed, has these great numbers. But the Tennessee Titans don't blitz, but neither did the Raiders last week. And not like Burrow had this particularly great game. But, when you go 5 wide and you sort of almost invite pressure like that, it might work out actually in, to the benefit of the Bengals, where they're able to throw it around and find a weakness in the Tennessee secondary, because right now, Jackrabbit Jenkins, who I don't even think is a particularly good cornerback, is questionable.
Not a good nickname.
It's not even his nickname. He literally changed his name to Jackrabbit. Like, it's his actual name at this point, or it's in the process. It's neither here nor there. But the point is if you're relying on Jackrabbit Jenkins to be one of your main corners, going up against an offense that has, at the very least 3 legit wide receivers, there's going to be some holes in that secondary. And so the Titans, for all of the greatness of the defensive line, and some of those guys are legitimately frightening, especially for a Bengals offensive line that's particularly good, we could be looking at some big plays here when the Bengals are able to pick that up, whether that's Joe Mixon staying into block, whether that's CJ Uzomah staying into block, or whatever, or just Joe Burrow getting it out quick enough, right? I think the Bengals can hit some big plays in this game. And so, maybe Tennessee does. Maybe it's Derrick Henry running for 80 yards. By the way, this is a guy who just got cleared for contact 3 days ago.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, this idea that 27, attempts, like, here we come. You're going to get Derrick Henry in the face. The good news is for the Titans is at least they have other guys who can, they at least now know they can trust the Dontrell Hilliards, the Deontay Foremans, right? So I'm actually interested in a couple of props here that are sort of playing under that sort of concept that I think we're still going to get a ton of rushing from the Titans. And so we haven't seen some numbers pop up on the other guys, the Hilliards and the Foremans of the world. And so I'm looking to bet those guys when those numbers pop up. I'm also probably looking, and I'm waiting, and obviously they can't put a prop up until he's removed from IR and activated, which the expectation is that's going to come on Friday. I'm looking to maybe fade Derrick Henry here because there's a chance the prop market opens him at like 100 yards. And again, maybe the Titans as a collective get 180 yards, but I'm not necessarily positive that Derrick Henry is going to be fully ready to go, because as much as he's awesome, if he's 10% off of his normal self, this is the NFL, man. This is the playoffs, the speed, the aggressiveness, like we have taken it up a notch here. It's going to be tough to walk in 2.5 months from an injury, get cleared for contact on Tuesday, and then play in a playoff game and be dominant. So I'm looking at that. The other thing is, when Henry was out, you saw Ryan Tannehill, when the ball got around the goal line, he would take it a little bit more often. So he's interesting to me at a touchdown, anytime touchdown, a plus 290. Other couple ones, Hilliard right now is a plus 700. That's kind of interesting because, again, I don't know, Foreman, Henry, Hilliard, who's going to be involved once we get down to any sort of given carry in the red zone. That's plus 700. That's kind of interesting. And then the other one is Julio Jones under 44.5. And I know it's sort of sacrilege to fade Julio Jones because of, listen, his playoff career is impressive. His career in general is impressive. He's going to play in this game. But again, how long does Julio Jones ever last in some of these football games? And so you might be looking to fade him at 44.5. I know that number is really low, but how many, again, how often is Tannehill going to throw this football, knowing that, they're going to want to quote unquote establish Derrick Henry, but they also have other guys that when Derrick Henry comes out of the game, they're going to hand the ball off to other players. So if the great advantage that the Titans have in this game is that they're able to run the football all day on Cincinnati, then they should probably just run the football all day on Cincinnati from a strategic standpoint. So I don't want to fade A.J. Brown because that guy can go to the house at any time. Some of the other wide receivers and tight ends have super low numbers, but are capable targets for Tannehill. So I'm not going to get into, trying to fade them. Julio Jones is the one that's number is, it's not even that it's too high. I mean, it's 44.5. That's not all that much. It's just a guy that could end up with 2 catches for 27 yards and just be out there causing distraction, causing attention, but just might not have the output that maybe people are hoping for just because he is quote unquote healthy, which we'll see how long that necessarily lasts in this game. So I got Cincinnati plus 3.5. Again, there's no guarantees in all of this. I just think that this is a closer game and Mike Vrabel is content with that. No real take on the total whatsoever at 47.5 here. That one you can sort of listen. It's either going to be big plays that get that up over 47.5, or it's not. And I rather just not sit there and hope that a bunch of big plays happen. I already do that anyway as I'm watching the game because I'm obviously really interested in the game. And any big plays will probably help Cincinnati in this one based on the secondary for the Titans.
Yeah, man, I got to say that ultimately I think we agree here on this game. I think the Titans win the game, but their style of play isn't conducive unless the Bengals just fold, unless they just get completely just trounced on the trenches on both sides of the line. I mean, I just see them having the ability to keep it close, and if not, backdoor cover, it's that extra half point. And it's more so, I'm going to say and acknowledge, it's learning the lines, right? And going towards the number as opposed to the two teams. Because if I came in just thinking about the two teams, I'm like, yeah, I'm on the Titans. But I'm on the Titans at what number? So that's kind of where I'm at. And I think that people listening to this trying to get their picks, I think that's kind of how you got to stop and think about it. It's like, how confident are you in the Titans to win? Because I think they're going to win. Yeah. But I can't say that they're going to win by 2 touchdowns or a touchdown or whatever. Right. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, and I'm here to tell you, the people who are telling you that they're on the Titans, those people are on the Titans at minus 2.5, right? The content people that you're listening to this week, right? When I look at that line, it opens 2.5, and it was 2.5 for not very long. And I understand that. Obviously, the appetite at this point in the marketplace is for 3.5. or certainly like that's the correct number, right? Like we haven't gone higher than 3.5. So think about it this way, right? With 2.5, when 2.5 opened, a bunch of people came in, grabbed that Titans 2.5 and said that's too low. I felt like that was around the correct number, at least from a market standpoint, right? Based on the point spreads that we've talked about before. Knowing that, okay, the Titans are going to take money because they have the rest advantage. They are at, maybe there's a bump for home field advantage because it's the playoffs. I don't necessarily buy into that theory. All of that sort of thing. I understand why the number would go up, but once it crosses through 3 and goes to 3.5, I'm just good, right? I think, and everybody else is just kind of set, right? Like I don't know the people are clamoring right now for Tennessee minus 3.5. And again, Tennessee might win this by 4. They might win this game by 40. But the point is the bet on Tennessee should have been at 2.5. Now, again, you didn't have any time to really make that bet, and 3 was up for a very brief amount of time as well here, right? But they took enough money at minus 2.5 and at minus 3 to know that there's not really any reason to go back. Now, maybe it goes back to 3 because anything that lands on 3 is a push, but it's certainly not crossing back to 2.5. So the ship has sailed when it comes to, oh, this person out there is on Tennessee, I should be on Tennessee too. And if they're recommending, and it's a tricky spot, right? Because like if you bet at minus 2.5 and you're recommending it at minus 3.5, they're going to need to cover that minus 3.5 for you to be sort of quote unquote correct, even though the money is going to cash in your account because you are on minus 2.5. But like that's the difference between betting and sort of just being the content providers and giving out betting advice and that sort of thing. Because that probability that with the game landing on 3 is so relatively high, right? And so that really matters. So be careful. Again, don't have to listen to me and grab Cincinnati plus 3.5. That is, certainly, I have been wrong before here. And again, this game could go a variety of ways. Just know that if you're betting Tennessee because somebody else is recommending it, they've probably either left out the part where they bet them at minus 2.5, or they are admitting that they bet this number at 2.5 and are still just kind of married to that idea, right? Because it's hard to bet something at minus 2.5 and then come back the other way on plus 3.5 because there's some sort of implicit thing where it's like, well, if I'm wrong, oh man, like I had it in the first place. Like, why did I go up against my initial instinct and that sort of thing, right? There's a whole psychological element to it. And trust me, there's a lot going on psychologically when it comes to sports betting.
Totally got you. And there's a lot going on when it comes to the Niners and Packers. Packers are 5.5 point favorites. I've even seen 6 at some places, but I'm here to tell you that I have to take my San Francisco 49ers here and the points. I'm going to ride with Shanahan and the playbook being able to get up early, but I also like the fact that we've seen this game before where they do not need to let Jimmy Garoppolo do anything. And especially after watching that interception and what happened late in that game last week, we've seen this. Go back to, I know this is tough to say, pre-pandemic, but the game exactly, right? The Niners played the Packers in the playoffs. Jimmy Garoppolo threw the ball maybe 7 times. I know it sounds like I'm exaggerating, but if it's more than 7, it's not much over 10. My point is it was just hand off the ball, run the ball, run the ball, run the ball. If the Niners are able to run the ball, which they are in most instances against anybody, but if they can get pressure with their D-line, that's going to be the key. If they can do that, the blueprint is there. Can they execute? Give me the points. And I'm going to hate watching Jimmy Garoppolo. I know that when this game ultimately at some point is going to come down to Garoppolo. But in this instance, give me the points. At 5.5, I'll take the points. At 6, I'll take the points. That's where I'm at.
It's funny, you mentioned the 5.5, 6, right? And so it's funny how, because of the focus of these games, right? Any little injury news shifts perspective and shifts what sort of people are talking about, right? Remember last week when Trent Williams, he missed a couple of practices early on in the week. And it's like, Williams, if he's not able to go, like, how are they going to stop the Dallas defensive ends? And we never had to find out the answer to that because Trent Williams was fine, right? And it's like, I'm sorry he missed the practice on Tuesday or Wednesday. Do you think Trent Williams needs to practice on Tuesday, Wednesday, frankly, even Thursday? Like, the guy knows what he's doing, right? It's, and not to besmirch the good name of the offensive tackle, right? But by and large, his job is hey, there's guy running towards me, let's block him, right? Like, again, that's an oversimplification, especially in the 49ers run game. But it's not like there's elaborate like pass routes and some changes to some calls here or there. Obviously, offensive line, it's shift left, shift right. If this, pass your guy off, communicate, all of that sort of thing. But like none of that's getting figured out on Tuesday before the game starts, right? And so Trent Williams looks fine. He ends up doing a great job against the Dallas, pass rush, all of that sort of thing. This week, it's Bosa, it's Warner. There's some Jimmy G injury talk for the fourth straight week. And then all we see is Jimmy just throwing, darts around there. Again, as long as Jimmy's not thinking, right? Jimmy's thinking. That's what you don't want to have to say sitting on your couch on Saturday night. Oh no, Jimmy's thinking. This is not going to go well. Jimmy can't think. We don't want Jimmy thinking. I mean, I'm sure he could. I'm sure he's got a great aptitude in a series of things. Some of those things might not be sort of on the run where you have very large, scary people chasing you, right? That's just not what he does. So this line ticks up to 6 because people are worried about Warner and they're worried about Bosa. And, first thing Warner tweets out, my ankle's fine. You're going to be good to go. Okay, check him off the list, right? And then it's like Nick Bosa, okay, like he's shown up to practice. And listen, that hit was rough. That hit was rough. I would want a few days to myself after getting hit like that. And, concussions come in various shapes and sizes and all of that sort of thing. So hopefully he ends up not having some sort of reoccurrence or anything like that. But it's like, okay, yeah, it looks like Nick Bosa is going to play. And the Jimmy G, it's like, okay, we see shots of him in practice and he's throwing the ball and everything looks fine from that standpoint. It's like, okay. So we went to 6 because we were a little bit worried about these injuries, but now we're back off of that relatively key number of 6 and down to 5.5, right? And we talked about the idea of the money line rollover and all of that sort of thing. So you already know what we're on as far as this game is concerned, right? San Francisco, we think that they, again, high-end possibilities here with going to the Super Bowl, all of that sort of thing. It's going to be easy because Green Bay is really good here. But I did a little research this past week, and I went back and I watched every game these 8 teams really have played against each other in the recent past. And so I went back and I watched that week, week 3, I believe, game. Could be wrong, might have been week 5. I've all jumbled up when it comes to the games that I've watched here from these previous meetings, because 3 of these 4 teams have played already this season. So I go back and I watch that game, right? And I don't know like how you remember that game. As a 49ers fan, you probably remember it better than most, right? But I, for some reason, got a little more caught up in the idea that the Packers kind of blew out the 49ers in that game. But that wasn't the case at all. I mean, it was early because it was 17-0, and I don't know. I didn't look up to see whether I was on San Francisco or whether I was on Green Bay in that game. But I guess the point is like I remember them for the 49ers having to score at the end of the first half and running that play with basically 0 seconds on the clock, passing on the field goals. Like the one time that Shanahan was actually like aggressive this entire season, where he's just like, yeah, we need to get 7 here. 3 isn't going to be enough. And so they did, and Trey Lance scored that touchdown. But when it comes to that game, there were 2 positions of note here. And I think these are really important ones, certainly in football, but in one case, especially to the 49ers. And that's the running back position and the cornerback position. So in that first game, bear with me here, the corners for the 49ers were Josh Norman, Dante Johnson, not Deontay Johnson, Dante Johnson, and a gentleman by the name of, and I'm going to botch this name, Diamador Lenore. Are you familiar with the works of Diamador Lenore? Maybe you are as a 49ers fan because he was involved prominently in the first 3 games of the season. But the performance of Mr. Lenore basically put him on the bench for the rest of the season in that game. His snap count for the first 4 games of the season was 100%, 97%, 71%, and then 0%, and 0% basically throughout the rest of the season. Occasional snaps later on in the season. They basically saw something out of that 6th round pick to get him in the lineup, or maybe it was just a series of injuries. Obviously, Jason Verrett at the start of the year going out. maybe they just didn't have enough guys. I mean, you don't have enough guys, and Devonte Adams is on the other side, and Aaron Rodgers is throwing the ball around. Like, that's going to be problematic. K'Wan Williams, maybe a little bit more, not household name, but certainly a name that you're familiar with as a veteran corner on the 49ers. He played in 10% of the snaps in that game, right? Obviously banged up with an injury. He played in 86% of the snaps last week, right? Okay, so K'Wan Williams is back. He's ready to go. And then finally, a gentleman by the name most people might not know out there, by Ambry Thomas. Ambry Thomas didn't play for the 49ers for the first 13 weeks of the season. But in week 14, he got in the lineup and has not left the starting lineup. He has been basically close to 100% on the field defensively in the secondary. So you're looking at a secondary that is drastically different this time around than it was when they played the Packers. And when they played the Packers the first time, what was the big issue? It was pass interference calls left, right, and center, right? Guys not being able to keep their hands to themselves because they just weren't very good, right? They were going up against a precision passer and some excellent wide receivers, and they weren't able to hang on here. So there's a massive difference there. The other difference on the offensive side of the ball, and we only say this with like a handful of teams. The Ravens are one of these teams. The 49ers are certainly one of these teams. Who your running back is critical. And so Elijah Mitchell, again, week 3 in the season, he had played really well in his first game against Detroit, got hurt, and then wasn't back yet. Now we have seen since, especially again last week, that guy makes a difference from the running back position. Trey Sermon was the starting running back in that game and basically spent the entire game going the wrong way, going through the wrong holes, not hitting the holes, and basically getting benched the rest of the season. And when you're in the 49ers, that's a really big deal. Well, at least now, though, they've got Deebo Samuel. He can run the football for them. You know how many times Deebo Samuel took a carry in the backfield? 0 times. He had 2 rushes on the standard like Deebo end-around play. That was like the original Deebo rushing play for San Francisco. But they only started using him as a quite literal tailback in the latter half of the season. And so you're getting different play calling. You're getting player usage on offense. You are getting way different player usage on defense for this game. And by the way, as much it was 17-0 and everything looked like it was going to hell in a handbasket in that game, the 49ers took the lead in that game with 37 seconds left. And their biggest issue was they gave Aaron Rodgers too much time at the end of the game, right? They scored an 11-yard pass, I think it was, to Kyle Juszczyk. And they did so with 37 seconds left. And I'm sure you and I probably tweeted it. We probably texted about it. We probably said, oh, man, they gave Rodgers too much time. And that was the case. Yeah. And he made one throw in a zone defense that was just on the outside of Fred Warner's reach, and that was the difference in the game. It was one throw that Aaron Rodgers made, and that's with a pretty decrepit, pretty banged up San Francisco roster. And now they've got it figured out. Obviously, that's why we've liked them in the second half of the season. That's why we think they are a potential contender. And yeah, you're right. We have to worry about Jimmy G, and hopefully Jimmy G never has to throw the football and all of that sort of thing here. But if in the absolute worst case scenario, and I shouldn't say worst case because we've had weirder scenarios, especially with this matchup, with different teams being kind of beat up from a COVID standpoint. But if in the worst case scenario, the 49ers had a lead with 37 seconds left, they can certainly stay within 6 points of the Packers, right? I don't see how you can just lay the points here with Green Bay. And I'll finish on this. Second thing that's interesting to me in this game is, and you and I pointed it out when it happened, right? When Cleveland should have beat the Packers in Lambeau on Christmas night, right? But Baker Mayfield throws the 4 interceptions. They get, one of which on what probably should have been a holding call or a pass interference call that would have extended the game and that would have maybe gotten the Browns into field goal range for a game winner, right? They lose that game by 2 points.
Yeah.
And I think, it's funny, you compare the 49ers to the Browns, right? This is a team that, if you look at the defensive metrics, they are very similar, right? Same like blitz percentage, same sack percentage, pressure percentage, knockdowns, all of that sort of thing. They are built very similarly, right? Myles Garrett is the Nick Bosa, or Nick Bosa is the Myles Garrett, right? Defensively, they have linebackers who can back up into coverage, some versatility there, right? That's why the Browns drafted JOK. He is sort of a Fred Warner type in that he has that versatility to rush the quarterback or go back and drop into coverage. And so they're a very similar defensive team. Offensively, they're trying to do the same stuff, right? Run the football. Nick Chubb, Elijah Mitchell, right? Like Kareem Hunt is sort of that Deebo Samuel role where it's a guy you can split out. It's almost the reverse Deebo, where it's like he's a running back at first, but he can also play wide receiver, where obviously it's the different side for Samuel. And so the only difference, or maybe there isn't a difference, maybe Jimmy G and Baker Mayfield are the same guy, right? Roll them out, it becomes problematic. Have them think on their feet, it becomes problematic. But the point is, I think a lot of people are looking at that comparison and thinking like, oh man, you're comparing the 49ers to the Browns? Like the 49ers are much better than the Browns. Well, that's the point. If the Browns can, if the Browns can be that close to beating the Packers, why can't the 49ers? Right? This is a team that has way more experience than the Browns, et cetera, et cetera. And so the point is like, yeah, if you think that it's an insult to the 49ers that I compare them to the Browns, that's good news for the 49ers here, because the Browns have established that 400 total yards against the Packers defense and only giving up 300 total yards in that game to the Packers offense is absolutely something that's doable for a team that doesn't necessarily have the flash and the excitement of a team quarterbacked by Aaron Rodgers. So again, look to, maybe the sixes come back. Maybe you've already grabbed the six because, you listened to us earlier on in the week, but I'm certainly rolling over that 49ers money line. I'm rolling that over because that was the plan all along, right? It is, again, we talked about this on Tuesday. Like it takes a little cojones here because you're sitting there with the money one on the money line from that Cowboys game, and you don't want to give that back. But that was the point. We set that aside as a better payout option for a futures bet on the 49ers. So pretend that's a futures bet in your account. You just have to make it each week. We'll see who their opponent is next week if they are, in fact, able to win this game. But certainly +6, money line rollover continues with the 49ers, all of those things. Couple of props here to mention. I'm very interested in some George Kittle. Again, we don't necessarily want Jimmy G throwing the football a lot here. I look at Kittle and I'm like, do I want him over 49.5? Or if he gets over 49.5, there's going to be that George Kittle catch and run at some point, right? So I kind of like him over 19.5 for his longest reception, a little bit more than I like him for his yardage. You may remember, and this is getting deep into the weeds from that first game, they took a shot with Kittle over the middle, deep over the middle. But Jair Alexander, they talked about on the broadcast, he took off from his zone position on the, sort of offensive right side, the defensive left side, and he swooped in and caught that ball and intercepted that ball right before it was going to land right in the lap of George Kittle for a 30, 40-yard gain. Couple of things here. One, we're not sure if Jair Alexander is going to be back. Is this going to be like what we talked about with Derrick Henry, where, okay, you can get excited about Jair Alexander coming back. You can get excited about David Bakhtiari coming back, or who's the other one? Zadarius Smith, I believe, is the other one. Or Preston Smith. I can never sort of keep the two
Smith boys.
The Smith boys, right? The Smith brothers from a different mother. So, I'm looking at it and I'm going, okay, like there's a way to scheme Alexander's participation elsewhere, right? Or whoever that corner happens to be. And I don't know if they run that exact same play necessarily, whether it'll even be warm enough for Jimmy G to throw the ball that far on Saturday night. But the point is whether it's Kittle carrying people on his back off of some sort of crossing route or any other down the sideline, you know how he works, right? If you're going to bet the over yardage on him, because we think the volume hopefully is going to be a little bit low, I think I'd rather him to take that one big catch instead of kind of 3 or 4 that get him over 49.5. On the flip side, we talked about the corners being different. Devonte Adams under 94.5. We stared right in the face of Tom Brady last week. Is this going to be the one where we stare at a prime time player? I think he gets a lot of catches. I think they're going to force the 49ers to tackle on the outside, but I think this might be that 10 catch, like 80-yard type of game for Devonte Adams, more than sort of an explosive type of a game for Adams. The pinpoint throws that Rodgers was able to make in San Francisco, or that he's able to make in some nicer conditions, again, the weather affects him just as much, maybe not as much, but it certainly affects him as well, especially when it's, fitting balls into a window down the field. I think We're going to get a little Aaron Jones in the passing game, right? They haven't used him that much this season in the passing game. It hasn't been that like overt type of a thing here. But again, cold weather, pass rush for the 49ers. I think we get a lot of dump offs here to Aaron Jones. Over 3.5 receptions are interesting there. As much as I don't necessarily love, or listen, I'm flat out fading Devonte Adams from a yard standpoint, he's a little interesting for a touchdown at -135. And I know it's minus for a touchdown. You got to really want it, but they have enough plays, especially down by the goal line there, that Adams is a reasonable option. Elijah Mitchell, on the other hand, +120. Again, these aren't necessarily rocket science type plays here, but I think these numbers right now are decent. One thing to look for, Randall Cobb activated this week. That's Aaron Rodgers' boy, right? It's literally like his best buddy. He's obviously a potential guy who's going to be involved in red zone type plays here. We've talked about this before, I'm sure. I've certainly written about it. Mercedes Lewis, they always run one play per game around the goal line in the red zone for Mercedes Lewis. Obviously with Bob Tunyon out mid-season here, the old man Mercedes Lewis +600 to score a touchdown. And your man's Kyle Juszczyk is +700 to score a touchdown, right? That's a guy who... Well, first of all, he scored in the previous matchup. They've got a little bit more options. Speaking of, other options, right? Receiver, we've talked about this before, obviously, with Brandon Ayuk being better, Jawan Jennings all of a sudden in the mix, right? This is just such a different team than it was the first time around. But Juszczyk at +700, always interesting in this one. So a lot going on here. But listen, I just don't see how you can sort of lay the -5.5, -6 with the Packers if you're doing so based on sort of a previous matchup or anything like that. Again, I just think that there's options here for the 49ers to be able to win this game. And that's how I'm betting it.
Yeah, I mean, from my angle, I look at the whole season and think about how I was looking at Aaron Rodgers and the Packers, and so many of their games were, why are they favored by so much? And they'd find ways to squeak out the covers so many times. Yeah. But eventually, I feel like that's going to catch up to you. And now, especially in a thing where it's the playoffs, the biggest thing comes down to is styles make fights. And we have a history of seeing how the Niners match up against the Packers. We've seen that. That's not to say that, and you talk about that game where early on in the season, Packers got out to an early lead. It was Aaron Rodgers doing Aaron Rodgers things. We get that. We've seen that before. You know what else we've seen before? The Packers losing at home in the playoffs with Aaron Rodgers. Because as you said, it's cold. It's tough to go out and do those same things. So it's going to be very interesting for me to see how this game plays out. But much like we were talking about how the Titans are built for the playoffs in terms of running the ball and defense, there's a reason why that is the way we talk about the NFL playoffs, because that's what happens. And Shanahan, he got it from his daddy. He's going to run the ball and try to play defense and win this game. That's just what it is.
And it's funny, like the Packers are, I don't want to, again, like it sounds like I'm trashing the Packers here, right? But it's like,
no.
We get into the playoffs here and it's like, okay, well, what is your reputation built on? What is your rating, your metrics, all of that stuff sort of built on? And look at it this way, right? Look at they're built on 4 games with Detroit and Chicago. Right. We already know the ownership of, Chicago, and obviously Detroit won that last game when the Packers were, basically not really trying. But it was on the final drive, and Aaron Rodgers was already, I think, on the private jet back home by that point. But look at the rest of the schedule, right? Like it's the Washington football team, right? Because they won their division. Obviously, San Francisco, we just talked about, beating that team that was kind of a shadow of themselves. They had the Rams come to town the week that the Matt Stafford injury issues were sort of a big thing. They had Russell Wilson come to town the week after Russell Wilson decided, hey, I'm coming back early from a hand injury, and nobody scored in that game. Right? That game was scoreless basically through 3 quarters. And then the Packers ended up sort of winning that game, whatever it was, 14-0 or 14-3 or something along those lines. Right. So like, that's pretty fortunate. They go to the, Cardinals, and like Aaron Rodgers has nobody to work with. And Cliff Kingsbury and company and AJ Green not going the wrong direction at the end of that game. Right. They get that victory. We were on the Packers there, so it's not sort of a negative thing there. But like, think about it this way, right? Okay, they play the NFC, the winners of the divisions in the NFC. And we all forget, right, that Tampa didn't win the division last year. So they avoid Tampa in that case. They don't get to play the quote unquote best team in the NFC South. They get the Saints. And by the way, they got trucked by the Saints. And we all just sort of pushed this off because it was the first game of the year. It was a weird game that was in neutral site Jacksonville because of, different issues in New Orleans and all that sort of thing. And so, okay, you got the Saints, you got the Washington football team as the quote unquote division winners from last year. You got pretty much every game with the exception of the Cardinals game in a really good spot against that NFC West division. And then on the AFC side, you got the AFC North, which we spent the entire year going like, are any of these teams good? And they only won by 2 against against Cleveland. They won in overtime against Cincinnati. And then the other game, obviously Steelers at home. You and I sort of talked about how like that cover was a little bit fortunate. They deserved to win that game, but that cover was kind of a weird one. And the Ravens, where was Lamar Jackson? Right? Like, so you look down at the schedule and you go, man, they every single week. And that was the sort of interesting / frustrating part where I was like, every single week, it was like they either covered just barely or it was a matchup that really didn't make any, not sense, but it didn't really do anything for us to figure out their rating because the best team that they played, the toughest team that they played was Kansas City on the road. And Aaron Rodgers didn't participate in that game. Right? Yeah. That was the Jordan Love game. So we didn't even get to see the Packers. And that's all I'm saying here is I would like to see the Packers against one of these teams at full strength, right? But you build your metrics and you build everything on these teams that, again, if you're just comparing, using the Ravens as an example, right? If you're just saying like, yeah, Packers played the Ravens. Well, when did they play them? They play them in the first, second week of the season when the Ravens were healthy defensively, when Lamar Jackson was playing, or they play them in December when Huntley, by the way, like that was a 1-point game where they're going for 2. Yeah. Like not like the resume. You look at the record and you go 13-4, and the first game was kind of weird, so you throw that out. And the last game, obviously, like they were going to beat the Lions if Aaron Rodgers plays for 4 quarters. So like they really only lost 2 games all year, and that's what pumps up the value. But then when you go game to game and you look at the circumstances and you look at, listen, it goes deep into the weeds when we're looking at running back and cornerback snap counts here. But that matters, right? That matters when version of the team that you're playing. They didn't play San Francisco in the last week of the season. They played them in the 3rd week of the season. And so it's just like, you just can't get caught up in it because Aaron Rodgers is amazing and he makes all of these throws, right? But like, he was still the quarterback when they barely beat the Ravens in the end. He was still the quarterback when they barely beat the Browns, et cetera, et cetera. So, I don't know that the comeuppance, if you will, happens this week, but at a plus 200 price tag here against a team that has, I hate to use the word momentum because I don't buy into it sort of in a day-to-day or week-to-week basis, but like they do have all of their pieces and they do have their infrastructure, and that's something that the opponents of the Packers this season have had by and large. So like I'll take my shot with a plus 200 underdog here in the 49ers that were in the Super Bowl a couple of years ago. Like, I'll take that chance.
All right, so that handles, of course, Saturday's games. There's still some big boy matchups on Sunday, but before we get there, got to ask you a question. Have you checked out Cash Grab? Cash Grab is DRF Sports' all-new free-to-play sports prediction game where you can win real money. It's available to every sports fan in the App Store and the Google Play Store. Win real cash prizes every day, as well as a chance to win big money jackpots. All you have to do is download the free DRF Cash Grab app, create an account, and start predicting who will win the first quarter, how many touchdowns will Derrick Henry score. Answering questions like these can end in you making real money. So download the DRF Cash Grab app now and win big. As mentioned, we're trying to win big here in the divisional round of the playoffs, and we move on to Sunday's action, and we'll start with the Rams in Tampa to face Tom Brady and the Bucs. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I like the Rams and the points. The Rams are 3-point underdogs. The Bucs have been beat up all season, and yes, they're starting to get a little bit healthy, but I also think that our viewpoint of the Bucs is based by how well they are front runners. And I mean that front runners in the term of beating up on bad teams, really bad teams. And we just saw that last week. I think it's a good matchup for the Rams. I think on defense, they have the pieces, especially to match up with an injured Bucs team. Do you know what I mean? Like Jalen Ramsey doesn't have to worry about Godwin and Antonio Brown and Mike Evans, right? So it's going to be very interesting. And then plus the D-line. D-line, we know. Von Miller, they put him in positions to succeed. He's not out there every single snap. When they need a big play, here we go. You got Von Miller. And of course, we know the man's resume, Aaron Donald. I don't know. I just think I like the matchup for the Rams here. And it's a great run for Brady. It was a great season for them coming off their Super Bowl win, which we don't really see. A lot of teams have such crazy runs the following year. But give me the Rams and the points. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, one of my sort of big picture things is like I really like a team the second year after they were in the Super Bowl. Because, like, yeah, it's only one, maybe two extra games. But, like, it's really, really hard to play football, man. Like, I can sort of compare it to hockey, right? Where it's really hard to win the Stanley Cup 2 years in a row because of the absolute grind that takes. And obviously, it's a little bit different with the high impact and sort of low volume games that football season sort of brings along here. And so I think you're right about the matchup with the Rams. The problem is, I think the market knows that too. And that's why, like, there are no secrets in the NFL playoffs, right? Like, there are no secrets. There are no, like, hey, there's 14 games and, like, this number might be a little bit off because of, perception and, like, ratings and all of that sort of thing. And, like, we're in college basketball season right now, and it's like there's a lot of games on the board every night. And it's like, wow, there's a couple of numbers here that are off. And then you end up seeing them move by the time game, the tip occurs. And you're like, yeah, I was right. That number was 2 points off. And, whether or not one team covers or not is sort of irrelevant. It's just more like there's not going to be that soft spot when it comes to any games in the playoffs. And so, yeah, we're seeing that right now where, like, this line leading up until Monday was 4. It was 3.5, right? There was no way it was ever over 3. And we talked about it last week, like the idea of the Rams being that team that looks so good this week that it overvalues them the next week. And that's just what I fear right now. Now, the problem is with that concept is, like, that should lead you to Buccaneers -2.5, right? Because this number is toggling between 3 and 2.5. And it's sort of like, okay, you got to pay some juice if you want the -2.5, or you got to pay a lot of juice if you want the +3. Problem is the number is already adjusted for all of the sort of concerns that we might have for the Buccaneers, right? And so I did the thing, and by the way, let's clean it up from earlier. That game that we mentioned with San Francisco was week 3. I know that because these other 2 games were from week 5 from this past season. And so that previous meeting and the meeting last year, now Jared Goff was the quarterback here, but again, when it comes to the Rams, right, it's much more about system from an offensive standpoint. So don't kill me for comparing a second game here just because Jared Goff was the quarterback. The Rams won both those games, basically each game by a score, 10 points in that second game. But what I noticed most interestingly is nobody was able to run the football. Absolutely nobody was able to run the football on either side of the game. I think the max was like 70 yards for the Rams in one of these games. And so I look at this and I go, okay, if you're looking at these games and these matchups, which again, these coaching staffs have to have done, especially the one earlier on this season, you have to go, why would we ever run the football? Now, the Rams are still going to want to do it because you saw Cam Akers looking like he was shot out of a cannon on Monday night, and Sony Michel's still there. So they're still going to try because, as we've talked about here, is that the Bucs' run defense had fallen off towards the end of the season. Looked pretty good against the Eagles, though, this past week. So is it a matter of everybody's healthy? They can do different things schematically. They don't have, they can, those linebackers can play an extra step towards the line of scrimmage. Are they a little bit more apt to get to the line of scrimmage, that sort of thing, to be in the run stuffing mode? And so I just look at it and I go, like, why are either of these teams ever going to run the football if they can't do it? And they probably by now, because of the matchup, already know that they can't. So I think both teams are going to throw the football out. I think that's going to create a lot of kind of chaos, right? Like interceptions, a lot of possessions, right? I think we're going to see more than the sort of 9 to 10 possessions that each team kind of gets on average in an NFL football game. And when you get more possessions, that means a little bit more scoring. So I think this game is going to be really, really fun. And I think the over has some serious potential here at 48, right? We're not in that 50, 53, 54, 55 zone that the next game that we're going to talk about is in, right? And so I just look at it and I go, okay, if both teams are going to kind of throw it around, who is that going to benefit? And that's where the matchup comes in, because the last we saw of Tristan Wirfs, he's hobbling around, right? And their backup tackle, he's questionable. And both these guys are questionable. Ryan Jensen hasn't practiced all week, but we don't want to get too wrapped up into that, because we just talked about that with Trent Williams in San Francisco. Do these guys really need to practice? Well, I don't know that they need to practice. Maybe the center does a little bit more than, say, the right tackle. But Tristan Wirfs walking around in a boot, this is a 400-pound guy who is like having to put all his weight on his knee, his ankle, his leg. And then he's going to have to play Von Miller. He's going to have to play up against Leonard Floyd. He might even have to deal with Aaron Donald, who played a little defensive end sort of outside rusher that first time, had a strip sack of Brady that almost, basically sealed the game in that instance. And so I just look at it and I go, man, like, why do I want anything to do with the Bucks here? And unfortunately, I think the market's in the same way here. So I don't know that this game is going to land on 1 or 2. I think if you like the Rams, you're going to want to play the money line. But now that this number is off of 3, if there was a 3 minus 110, I'd be like, yeah, fine. Rams, plus 3 minus 110 absolutely makes a ton of sense. That's a fair price. Now that we're into the plus 3 minus 125 minus 2.5 zone, this has teaser written all over it. I've been waiting all week for some teaser to show itself to get paired with the following game. Now, the sort of dicey part in all of this is we're playing a little ping pong when it comes to these point spreads, right? We are seeing the Bills number come down and the Rams number come down, and we're like, well, if they could just both be plus 2.5 at the same time, that would be great. So we could just hit both of these 4 plus 8.5. And so while I really like the Saturday games from a betting perspective, because I think even just from an interest level, I'm interested to see how the Tennessee-Cincinnati game goes because of how I've analyzed that point spread. And obviously I'm interested to see how the 49ers game goes from a, money line, underdog, all of that sort of thing standpoint. Problem is with these two games, I'm more interested in these two games because I think they're obviously better matchups. Maybe it's not all that obvious, but they're certainly lined like they're better matchups. So they're actually better sort of football fan type games, and they're not that great as far as betting the spread games. Because again, I wish I had grabbed as much as I could have, or anything of that Rams plus 3.5 that was sort of available in the like look ahead ether universe out there this past week. But again, you never know how the Monday night game is going to go. I just can't get in on it now that it's plus 3 minus 125 plus 2.5. I'm not going to do that. So, and again, I don't want the Buccaneers because those O-line issues, like it's great and backing Brady and all of that sort of thing. But like we talked about the weaponry, right? And the lack thereof. So a couple of different angles from that standpoint. One, people say Jalen Ramsey does not follow a wide receiver around. And that was true up until this season. Obviously, there's been a defensive coordinator change for the Rams with Brandon Staley going from the Rams to the Chargers. Drink if you were waiting for a Brandon Staley mention in the podcast. This has nothing to do with the Chargers. But they started moving him around, right? Because he's a good tackler. He's good in run support. They put him in the slot sometimes. I don't know how you look at this team and this matchup and do anything other than just say, hey, Jalen Ramsey, follow Mike Evans around. Because Mike Evans has beaten him up in the previous 2 matchups. There is a clip, you might remember from this touchdown where he dragged 3 Rams into the end zone last season in a Monday night game, and he had 100 some odd yards in this past matchup. Like, he's the only guy who can beat you, and you have this sort of, the stopper in Jalen Ramsey where there are so few cover corners that can just flat out take somebody out of a game. I don't know how you don't have him follow in this situation.
Question for you. Wasn't there a time, if we go back to Patriots, Jags, and they had Jalen Ramsey on like Gronk, and obviously that Gronk is not this Gronk, but I'm bringing that up just to say, showing the versatility of Jalen Ramsey, right? And like, because sure, you go back to that Jags Patriots playoff game, right? I'm pretty sure for the majority of that game, Jalen Ramsey was on Gronk the majority of the time, following him around. And again, obviously, this Gronk is not that Gronk. Like that Gronk is still prime beast mode Gronk. But the versatility of Jalen Ramsey was more so the point that I was trying to just add on to what you were saying. Like my guy is just a great defensive player for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And so now that they've shown that they will put him in different places instead of just that one side that he always played, and that was sort of the frustration with rating Jalen Ramsey. that people had. And it's like, well, if he's not going to travel, right? If he's not going to travel around to the other team's best wide receiver, like how can we rate him as high as maybe some other guys? But if he's going to do that, and if they're going to move him around this season, which they have, I just don't understand why you wouldn't just go, okay, you're taking Mike Evans. Because here's the thing, and I'm glad you brought up Gronk, because he's sort of a fundamental here for a couple of different props that I have in this game. If you have offensive line issues and you've got some legit rushers on the outside, what do? You can't just build a new offensive lineman, but you got Gronk, who last year, when you would look at that team and you'd be like, why isn't Gronk catching more passes? Well, it's because he was staying into block in a lot of circumstances, right? We saw that in their playoff game against Washington, where it was like, okay, they got Chase Young, they got this massive defensive line. We're going to need Gronk to stay into block here. I think they keep Gronk into block a lot in this game. I think that's the sort of chapter of the game plan, or the sort of potential game plan that the Buccaneers have, because they have other tight ends, right? They have OJ, they have Cameron Brate. And like these guys can catch the ball, but they aren't necessarily blocking tight ends, right? Gronk, as you know, is a Hall of Fame tight end. He can do both. And I think they keep Gronk in a lot of the time. So I think unders on him, under 63.5 receiving yards or under 5.5 receptions are interesting, because I think you're going to see a lower amount of pass routes, which means there's options for Cameron Brate, who Brady trusts, throws it to him all the time. Over 16.5 receiving yards out there for Cameron Brate, and a Cameron Brate touchdown of plus 450. The other outlet, we saw it on Sunday. I made a last second, again, hopefully you caught the tweet 10 minutes before the game, but a last second add to my props portfolio with Gio Bernard. I even had him to score a touchdown. I couldn't even get that tweet off in time by the time I made that bet. But over receiving yards for Gio Bernard in this first matchup, where Brady ended up throwing the ball 40 times. Brady led the Bucs in rushing the first time around. Don't believe me about the whole not being able to run the football thing. Tom Brady had 3 carries for 14 yards in the first matchup in week 5. Led the team in rushing. Gio Bernard, I think, is going to play in this game a ton. I think he's going to catch the passes. We see that Brady likes throwing to the running back. He turned Leonard Fournette into a pass-catching, capable running back. Gio Bernard, that's his thing. Gio Bernard had 9 catches for 51 yards in the first matchup. So I'm going to be looking for Gio Bernard props in this. Haven't seen any of those pop necessarily. Touchdown is at plus 175, which isn't nearly as good as the 275 that he was last week, because guess what? He scored a touchdown, and they make the adjustment accordingly. For the Rams, I like Tyler Higbee again. I'm going back to the well. I'm going back to the well on a couple of these that we didn't hit last week. We were fortunate and able to hit a bunch. And this is sort of how it works, right? You have 6-7 touchdown props. The ones that hit at that price are no longer the price the next week because they hit. The ones that you didn't hit, well, you probably like them in the next game too. There's probably, depending on maybe some matchup changes or whatever. So like T. Higgins, for example, for Cincinnati, didn't hit last week. I will try him again this week. Whereas a Dawson Knox, right, hit last week, and the price goes down. So, sort of factor that in. So again, Tyler Higbee, I still like at plus 250 to score a touchdown. Price hasn't changed all that much from last week. And the other one is Sony Michel. Like, as much as Akers is getting the rock here, and I expect him to get more carries, Sony Michel is still involved, right? He is still potentially, we don't know, right? He is still potentially the goal line back. He was getting goal line carries. There was a couple, as we were incrementally going up on Sony Michel's rushing yards, there was some 3-yard, runs from the 3-yard line to the 2-yard line that helped us get a couple of yards. Those who had the over 56.5, I don't want to bring up bad memories for those who had a couple of yards higher than that. Cooper Kupp is, I know, I don't want to get into it. Cooper Kupp, his number is 100.5 here. Again, he went through almost 3/4 of that game by only having 5 yards last week. And if Arizona can jig up a coverage here to sort of slow Cooper Kupp down, I think the Buccaneers can certainly do that. And then I mentioned, right, if you're not targeting Gronk because he's blocking, if you're not able to target Mike Evans because hopefully Jalen Ramsey is, I'm not saying 100% of the time, but at least a lot of percent of the time following Mike Evans around, who's left? Tyler Johnson is the guy that's left. And he had a bunch of yards in the first matchup against the Rams. I think he was close to 60 or 70 yards in that game. His total is 31.5. So we're not asking a ton from Tyler Johnson. And if we think there's going to be volume, if Brady is going to have to throw or choose to throw 40 times in this game, he's got to throw it to somebody. And I think those somebodies are Tyler Johnson and Cameron Brate, sort of maybe not, and Gio Bernard, and maybe not necessarily by choice, but we know like 20 years of Tom Brady making do with what he has. And as much as, some years he's had Julian Edelman and Wes Welker and Randy Moss, some years he's got David Givens, right? And it just so happens that maybe this year that is that situation. So I'm not ruling out the fact that the Buccaneers could win this game. Again, I think the matchup is pretty clear that the Rams do have a lot of ways they can win this game. I think the market reflects that. I would prefer the money line over the spread. I'm certainly going to tease these two games. And the total 48, very interesting as well. So a lot of sort of smaller bets in this one versus some of the sort of bigger or more, high profile bets. When we talk like 49ers money line and Cincinnati plus 3.5, it's like, no, let's do a lot of sprinkling in these next two games. Certainly this game.
Yeah. Oh, I'll be sprinkling, and I'll definitely be sprinkling on the Rams plus 3. So let's go. I love it. Let's go. We got one more game.
Folks.
And hey.
Money line.
This is what we do.
Go. Money line it, man. Just money line it. Live.
Sure. Hey, I'm here. And I'm also here for this last game of the weekend because this game is giving me Super Bowl vibes because both teams seem to have Super Bowl goals. And we're talking about the Bills and the Chiefs. Chiefs are favored by 2 points, and this is a real tough game for me to pick a side on just because I feel like both teams had such a weird season, such extreme highs and lows. Like if we go back early on, we're talking about, are the Chiefs done? Will they make the playoffs? They're in last place in the division, right? So much going on. The Bills having their struggles, losing to the Jags, right? Like just like these weird games. But here we are. And I go back to last season, and these teams met in the playoffs. And I remember, there's still the Chiefs magic, right? Where it's like, oh no matter what's going on, it's the Chiefs magic. They'll figure out a way. And they did. But I feel like this time around, if I'm going to force myself to pick a side, which is what we do here, which is what I do here,
Fred,
I got to go with the Bills. And it's because the reason I'm going to go with the Bills is because I think you losing to the Chiefs last year and then the way that we saw them respond in their matchup the first time around this season kind of showed me that the Bills are like that shot we keep seeing of Stephon Diggs standing on the field, watching the celebration. Like that is the ish that keeps you up all night. Yeah. Now is your chance, Buffalo. You are here, Buffalo. They figured out we got to let Josh Allen cook. Bills Mafia, I'm with you. I'm not jumping through tables. Okay. But Bills Mafia, I'm with you.
Well, yeah, we'll see what happens after Sunday night, after all these bets come through, whether we can talk you into jumping through a table. So, okay, full disclosure. We talk a lot about wins on here. We talk a lot about losses. We talk a lot about how the results go, right? That's what makes this podcast a little bit different from most is that we don't just go, we have an entire episode essentially, right? Like based on the idea of like, let's look at what just happened this past week, right? That's the Tuesday episode that you have on this show by and large. And so full disclosure, I was absolutely on the Bills last year in the AFC Championship game. And then I'm almost positive when week 5 rolled around, I said to myself, not doing that again. And I was on the Chiefs to at least a small amount the first time around they played. So I'm 0-2 on this matchup, right? And so I come in just not ready to fire away here. I don't want to say I don't want anything to do with this game because I've already just said if plus 2.5 is available at the same time that plus 2.5 or even a plus 3 with a heavy amount of juice is available on the Rams, tease those two up because I think both of these games at the very least come down to one final score. And I think, strangely enough, that both games, if they don't come down to one final score, it's because the road team ended up blowing out the home team, which is, again, a weird thing to say in the playoffs. And so speaking of which, right, like we talked about the idea of like, do you get more credit for your home field advantage in the playoffs, in the form of Tennessee? Where is that in these two games, right? Like the Chiefs aren't getting the Arrowhead credit as we watch like Bills money pile in to take this off of 2.5. You and I talk all the time. If the line is 2.5, first you tease it up to 8.5. And the second thing you do is you don't bet it. You wait and see if you can get 3. But obviously somebody out there in the market doesn't care. They want the 2.5. They want the money line. They're wanting the Bills here, and they're not willing to wait for the 3. And so I just sit there and I go like, I get why you'd want Kansas City -1. Like, I just don't know why you'd make a bet on this game right now at any point, because you could see that you might get a decent -1 or even a money line on the Chiefs. And I'm also not looking to grab the Bills +2, right? Like, I'm not looking to bet on either side, because whichever way it goes feels a little bit more advantageous for the opposite direction, right? Like, if it comes down towards the Bills some more, feels advantageous for the Chiefs. If it somehow went back up and got to 3, obviously that's advantageous for the Bills. And so it's somewhat of a cop-out, because we're talking about -270 teaser legs here. But like, yeah, I'm going to tease this game up. And so I talked about the previous matchups, and you mentioned like, luck can change and like the different sort of, okay, back from January, okay, to September or early October. I'm rewatching that game yesterday. Bills Chiefs, obviously. At the very end of the game, Al Michaels, Sunday Night Football game, Al Michaels turns to Chris Collinsworth. Presumably, I didn't see whether he turned to him or they just said it. And he says to Collinsworth, "So, partner, who do you like right now in the AFC, the Bills or the Chargers?" He said Chargers. That's how long, like, it was just week 5, but it was so long ago that the two names in people's mouths when it came to the AFC after the Bills trucked the Chiefs were Bills or Chargers. Because obviously the Chargers had just walked into Arrowhead and won a football game there. They had a great record, 2 games up on Kansas City at that time, right? Pour one out for the Chargers season, week 5 getting mentioned as like Super Bowl contender to not making the playoffs. The point is like,
yeah, Staley mess. I'm counting that as a Staley.
I didn't say it. I made the point. I desperately
that's at least a half.
Avoided it.
At least I
tried to avoid it. Whatever. People are already drunk because of the first one. But you're right, man. Like that second, I watched the 2 games sort of in order, and you go, okay, AFC Championship game, then the one from this year, and you go, man, like the Bills. It's weird to say, but like they look grown up. Right? Like they look growns up in the second game, right? Like and you mentioned like the Stephon Diggs thing, and it's like, that's sort of, motivation point or whatever. And that's what they brought to that game. So now the Chiefs have to bring their own sort of revenge level, or like whatever level that they have, right? Because listen, the Chiefs have a Super Bowl win and, the second Super Bowl appearance, right? Speaking of sort of, these years sort of piling up on them from a football standpoint, right? And so I think that's reason to like the Bills, where it's like, yeah, it's either not going to be a rivalry or it's going to be a rivalry, right? And so I think we all want the Bills to win this game because it makes future seasons more interesting, right? It puts Josh Allen on another plateau. It puts, all of the Bills franchise, and that's a likable franchise and a likable fan base and all that sort of thing, right? So we're really pulling, we're really hoping they make it, right? Like the guy in the PG, the G-rated movie versus the PG-rated movie versus the R-rated movie, right? With the claws and the fangs. We really want them to make it, right? And so that's the thing that keeps me off of like the Bills money line, the Bills plus, whatever, is that like, are we all just dying here for the Bills to beat the Chiefs? Just to bring another team into the mix, because we look around at these teams and the Titans are a 1 seed, then you got Bills and Chiefs, and like after that in the AFC, like it's, what I mean? Like we had the Steelers in the playoffs somehow. We had the Raiders in the playoffs somehow. And like, yeah, we have high hopes for Cincinnati and Joe Burrow, and we have high hopes for the Chargers and Justin Herbert. Drink it for a Justin Herbert reference. But like we have high hopes for those 2 guys and those 2 teams in the future. But like, man, if the Chiefs are just going to win all the time, like, that's not really all that fun. So the point is like a lot of people are sort of just betting with their heart here versus betting with their head. Does that mean the Bills can't win this game? Of course it doesn't, right? Like, yeah, they can win this game, and I kind of think that they do, but I'm not getting the price that I would want to knock the Chiefs off their pedestal here at like +110 on the money line here. So I know that's not all that fun, but again, we can get into like the sprinkle game. I think we're going to see a lot of scoring in this game. I think this game is going to be really fun. I think not betting the side, for example, isn't going to all of a sudden mean you're just not interested in watching this game. It certainly doesn't mean that there aren't better bets out there. I think both teams, like we saw the Bills go deep into the playbook. You and I talked about it after this game. What did they do? They stole from the Ravens, right? The Ravens had just beaten the Chiefs, and they used Josh Allen in design run. It's funny, you look at the box scores for the AFC Championship game versus that game last time around, and Josh Allen actually has more rushing yards in the AFC Championship game. But it's how he got those rushing yards. It was coverage, scramble, takeoff for 15 to 20 yards here and there. There was some 15-yard carries on 3rd and 25 that don't really get you anywhere from a game standpoint. But how did they do it in the second game? It was designed run, misdirection plays, pulling tackles, all of like the Ravens Lamar Jackson style offense. So I'll be interested to see if they try that. Problem is the Josh Allen prices right now on rushing yards are pretty up there, right? 50, 60 yards. But if they're going to have Josh Allen, if they're going to put that on tape, which they already have, obviously, I think it means that the running backs for Buffalo can have some success. Problem is, if you're able to just throw the ball all over the Chiefs, which I think the Bills are going to be able to do, why would you bother running the football, right? So I can't even attack like a Devin Singletary prop or something like that because I don't know how many carries he's going to get because, again, we'll compare these two games again. The Bills were 2 of 3 in the red zone in their win. They were 2 and 5 in the red zone in the loss. Well, that means two things. One, they were willing to kick some field goals that first time around. You'll recall that, right? Where Sean McDermott brought field goals to a touchdown fight. That didn't work particularly well. In the second game, they won by 10 points, or I think it was even a little bit higher than that. I'm conflating games at this point. But they were able to do so by only being in the red zone 3 times? How's that possible? Well, they didn't need to get to the red zone. They hit big plays against Kansas City, right? They weren't kicking field goals. They were hitting long touchdowns, right? Your man Sorensen was getting absolutely torched in that game, right? And so, yeah. So I think the Bills are going to be able to throw the football all day long here. I'm very interested in Josh Allen overs. He's quote unquote only at 278.5. I think this is a back and forth. Patrick Mahomes is going to be able to throw. I think this is the game that the Bills are going to miss Trey White, right? It's funny how it works in the NFL or even in any sport, right? Where it's like team player gets injured. We go, oh man, like that's going to jam him up for the rest of the season. And people use that the next game and they go, okay, well, like Trey White got hurt last week. That's not going to be good, right? And that injury happened the week before the super wind game against the Patriots. And I remember we were talking about it as in like, well, why is this going to matter to the Bills this week? It's not like Trey White had anybody like locked in on the Patriots that he absolutely had to stop. And of course, the Patriots never even threw the football. So like I could have been out there at corner and it wouldn't have made a difference, right? Here's the problem. You go through the schedule and it's like Falcons, Panthers, Jets. It's like Trey White's not going to be necessary for those teams. He's not even going to be all again. Patriots again last week. He's not going to be all that necessary. It's going to be necessary against Tyreek Hill. He's going to be necessary against the Chiefs offense at large, right? Travis Kelce, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm going to bet Tyreek Hill over 70.5 receiving yards here because this is the test for the Bills secondary without Tre'Davious White. And again, that's another thing where it's like, okay, he was around that first game. Now they got a donation pick 6 touchdown when Tyreek Hill flat out dropped a pass that went directly into, I believe it was Micah Hyde's hands. And he, pick 6 and the game was blown open and all that sort of thing. Trey White's not around here. I think Hill over 70.5 is the play. Can't go back to the well with Mahomes on the rushing. That number has adjusted, right? We saw that 19.5, 20.5 last week. It's into the mid 20s this week. I believe that would make last week's bet a loser if that number was the same as it was last week. But I think there's going to be a lot of scoring, touchdowns. Dawson Knox, we talked about the adjustment made there. But again, if I think the scoring is going to be up, I don't mind it's not even that massive an adjustment, a small adjustment on Dawson Knox plus 175, Gabe Davis plus 300, I don't want to say unknown, but like sort of underrated wide receiver in the league potentially. He's plus 300 to score. Mecole Hardman is plus 300 to score. Isaiah McKenzie is plus 350 to score. That's a guy who in the red zone, on sort of jet sweeps, that sort of thing, he could be involved. A lot of like plus 300s. Blake Bell, backup tight end for the Chiefs. We tried it last week with the third string tight end. I've already forgotten his name. Noah. Blanking on it. It's not that important. Blake Bell, the Belldozer. last week, those Noah Gray. I got it, folks. Noah Gray. We tried Noah Gray last week because he was plus 1,500, plus 1,600. And like, this is one where he didn't even score and the number adjusted. He's down to 10-1, the same way that Blake Bell is 10-1. And so like that takes me off of Noah Gray, and we didn't even get the payout for the price drop. So it tells us we were on the right track with a 15-1 that didn't necessarily finish that way. And now we've got two tight ends here in Bell and Gray that are priced the same way. But Bell's around the line of scrimmage a little bit more in goal line situations, right? He is the second tight end when they go to a heavy package down low. So 10-1 for him is a little bit interesting, right? So handful of guys there, maybe one or two of those cash, we end up profitable, right? Big picture type of thing. So only the two overs from a prop standpoint. I will obviously have more to say potentially about this game as we get closer to game time via Twitter. So be able to check that out. Obviously, everything I do with the score. I haven't wrote my props articles yet. That's happening today. So you can check those out as well for filling in the blanks, so to speak. But I like to just kind of unload the notebook on this show and then sort of narrow it down for once we get to the actual written published stuff.
No, definitely. And that sounds like a really, really, really interesting piece. And I will be looking forward to reading for sure, because we love our props and how it goes into our NFL Sundays and I guess Saturdays as well in the playoffs. But heading into the divisional round, I'm feeling really good. And, you know, maybe that's just the vibes from last week. But
could be.
This week, as mentioned, I mean, hey, what's wrong with that, right? If I can't feel good after a 5-1 week, when am I ever going to feel good? I got to wait to go to be 6-0. I don't think that's ever going to happen. So I'm going to take the wins. I'm going to take the wins as they come. And to recap what I've said here, and this is not Matt Russell. This is me, Sheldon Alexander. I am on the Buffalo Bills +2. I'm also on the Rams +3. Give me the Niners in the points at +5.5. We love the money line sprinkle there with the Niners as well.
Try to get 6. Try to get 6.
Get 6. Cool. Totally good. And of course, in the very first game, we like the Bengals. The hook has me on the Bengals. Did I just realize that it's all underdogs there?
Listen, man, here's the thing. I was ready to come on this show, and the first thing I was going to say was I'm just going to tell everybody, like, I like all of the underdogs, obviously, to various degrees. Last week, we talked about this on Tuesday. Last week, I was ready to, you know, again, as somebody who likes betting underdogs, who is more of an underdog player than a favorite player, I came into last week looking at the board going, like, the only underdog I like is San Francisco, and that's to win outright. And again, if I was a smarter guy, I would have just bet all the favorites except San Francisco, and I would have gone 6-0. And I bet the Rams as a favorite, and you know what I mean? And we did some teasing with some others, and we took some totals with some others, right? But like the only favorite that I bet outright was the Rams, and I was all ready for them to somehow not cover that game because of the success that the favorites had throughout the week. And so, yeah, like if you had told me going in that it was going to be 5-1 favorites over underdogs going into last week, I would have been like, yeah, that makes a ton of sense to me, like almost too much sense. And right now, again, we talked about my level of interest in backing some of these underdogs and at what prices we were going to get. Like, I'm fine liking all 4 underdogs. Like, I'll put it this way. Like, again, we sort of say, like, aren't these the games that we traffic in, right? Aren't these the games where it's short spreads? We're getting an extra half point on a 3. We are willing to back a road underdog to win a game, a team that nobody necessarily gives a ton of credit to, like in, for example, the Bengals, like that sort of thing. The 49ers, like fading the Packers, which, you know, goes to certain degrees of success throughout the season, right? Like these are the games we traffic in a lot better than the 8.5 point spread, you know, Tampa Philly game, the 13-point spread Pittsburgh Kansas City game, right? Like those things are a lot tougher to sort of quantify here. Whereas like this time we can sink our teeth into some of these matchups and see where teams have advantages when it comes to winning or losing games. And I think that's where we do better.
No, for sure. I totally get that. And I can't wait to see how these games play out. Can't wait to come back on Tuesday to break all of this down and recap everything that happened. But in the meantime, we also have a lot of other things that we talk about on this pod. And, you know, the plug for where people can find a lot of this information as you hand out winners, not only in the NFL, but also in college basketball? Where can the people find that information, and what exactly is said information? If you can give us a little bit of a tease.
Okay. Well, first we need to have a conversation. I need your help here, and I need the listeners' help here as well. It's a little bit awkward for me. So first and foremost, at MRussAuthentic, MRUSS Authentic is the Twitter handle. So I had a bit of an issue this week. So we talked on the podcast. We gave out some plays, or we talked about giving out plays on the podcast. I said, okay, you know what? We're gonna give them out on Twitter on Tuesday. Gave out 12 games. Really weird night. We end up going 5-7. Not a disaster by any means. Like, these things are going to happen. Like, certainly not 10-3 or 13. Like that type of a night. But it was one of those really weird nights where you go and you start grading out the bets, and you're like, man, I should have lost that game. Oh man, I probably should have won that game. You know what I mean? And it was just like a ton of late game finishes. I'm watching the Northwestern game at the end, and they did everything they could not to get in through the back door against Wisconsin. UCF comes from 20 down to force overtime and then cover -3. Didn't deserve that one at all. Meanwhile, South Carolina's up 5, and they're getting 12.5, 13 points, and somehow they lose the second half by 20 points, and they don't cover that game. And so it's like a lot of like up and down. And when it all shakes down, it's 5-7. And I'm not really sure whether we deserved better than 5-7, whether 5-7 was appropriate or whatever. All that is to say, I'm like, okay, let's just take a breath here on a kind of a wacky Tuesday night. And so Wednesday rolls around, and listen, I'm working on this football stuff. We just did an hour plus on the NFL. Like, that just doesn't come from nowhere. That comes from preparation and watching games and looking over box scores and looking over everything that we do to get this podcast and all of my content over at The Score out on a plate for everybody. The afternoon goes by, and I still got a couple of things to do, and I haven't even made any of the bets that I was going to make on Wednesday night. And I get a workout in, 20 straight, by the way, on the Peloton. What's up? And then the fiance and I, we go to go grocery shopping. And then I remember, like, while we're grocery shopping, I haven't even made the bets that I wanted to make for the night. And it's 6:00. So I still got an hour or whatever, but I'm like literally in the grocery store, pulling up the 7:00 games and just betting, hammering away on the app and just betting these games. You're laughing right now. I don't know why you're laughing, but maybe it's the grocery store element. I don't know.
It's amazing. That's just amazing. I love everything about this.
And so I'm like, okay, I'll get the 7:00 game, and I know how timing works and the clock. And I go, okay, I'll be home before 7, but like, I want to make sure I get these games in, and then I'll get the 8:00, 9:00 games in after 7. And so, we get home 6:45, 7:00 games start, and I go, oh man, I haven't posted them on Twitter because like the day kind of got away from me, right? Like, what am I going to post at 7:15? I'm going to post the 7:00 games. Am I only going to post the 8 and 9:00 games? Like, that's got just win all of the 7s and lose all of the 9s, like written all over it. And I had 9 games on my sheet. And so I just go, okay, you know what? 5-7, who's really even looking for basketball plays after last night anyway? People weren't exactly like, knocking down the door in the DMs or via Twitter, which is to say, if you want basketball plays, even after a 5-7, again, that's 5-7 in 1,000 bets. It's not that big of a deal. They will be worse nights, to be completely honest with you. So message me if you want, because sometimes I need the reminder, I guess is the point. The overall point here, Shell, is what do I do now? Because, and I swear I can provide the receipts, as the kids say, yada, yada, yada. I won every single bet.
Of course.
I have never swept a card that was bigger than 5 games in my life, right? Like 6 games, we get into the 5-1s, 9 games, maybe there's a 8-1 in there, but more, probably the best night was a 7-2, never 9-0. So I go, oh my God, like it was hollow. It was this hollow victory because I was like, there's nobody like, right? Like if he didn't post it, did it happen? Right. And I'm sure people listening to this right now are like, that sounds made up. I think it's made up right now. And it happened. And then so Thursday rolls around, and now I'm like, I went 9-0 yesterday. but like that just means I'm going 0-4 tonight. If I post what I have here. I made one bet last night because I was so afraid of the sort of reversion or sort of the statistical regression or whatever. It was Indiana +3 at home. That won too. So I've won 10 straight college basketball bets and nobody knows it except for me. And then like, that's not normally a big deal. And when I would just bet professionally or bet sort of as an amateur, I'd be like, yeah, sick. Like, you know, betting is such an intrinsic thing where it's like, yeah, you have a really good night unless you are a content provider or somebody who tweets out picks and has actually people follow those picks, which we do. Like, I just like, it was this incredibly weird sort of feeling where it was like, I kind of miss the old days where I would just be happy that I won all of these bets. So my point is like, what am I supposed to do, right? Like and again, like the rest of the games that I thought, you know, that were on my theoretical card on Thursday, you know, I think that they might've gone like 4-2, but I only made the one bet and I didn't even put it out there. I was thinking about tweeting, like, I think Indiana's got a real chance to win this game, but I didn't even want to do that because it's like, all of the wins happened in silence and now there's going to be sort of an avalanche. Or at least that's how I feel as a superstitious person. I don't know how superstitious you are. Maybe you're a little stitious. And so I just go, I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to give out an 0-5 night here if I tweet these out. And it ended up being 1-0 and the whole card probably went like 4-3 or something like that. I have to grade it way too early Friday morning. And there was some really late games on that card, some 11 p.m. starts. So all this is to say, listen, I'm going to put out the plays. I'll tell you right now, I bet Maryland +7.5 Friday night tonight against Illinois at home. My numbers make that 4.5. I think it's down to 7 after, you know, because I bet this last night and it moved a half point. I'd bet, you know, my numbers make it 4.5. I'd bet it down to 6. Hopefully you can grab the 7 there. That's Friday night's pick. We'll see how that goes, right? That has a 0% chance of winning, basically, based on what I just told you, at least in my sort of crazy, superstitious mind. All that is to say, we're going to put out a bunch of plays on Saturday. Last week, we put out 26 games. They went 13-13. It was a weird, wild ride last week, but again, that's what will happen. And we're going to lose a game. We might lose that game tonight. We might lose that Maryland game tonight. Might lose a bunch of games on Saturday. But I just want, you know, it's therapeutic that I had to talk to somebody about this. That like, yes, it was nice to win the games, but like you and I get into this point where like, we want to be right for the people, right? Like, and it's kind of a dumb thing for, you know, most people don't have this sort of self-pressure or whatever, but it's this thing that does live within us. And so when we have, you know, again, I don't know if that's how you feel about it or whether you'd be sort of feeling the same way Thursday after a big night, not tweeting that out. And again, maybe nobody followed it. Maybe nobody would have, you know, liked it or whatever. I don't really care from a social media standpoint. It's really more the handful of people, the people that have been with us for a really long time that like, I can't go to them after and be like, yeah, we went 9-0 yesterday, but I didn't tweet it out because honestly, who cares? It's really just, I'm trying to avoid giving out the 2-7 night because I know that's coming because that's just how math works, right? And 11-7 would be great over 2 nights. But just mathematically, we talk about some of these, you know, small sample sizes. 9-0 is certainly a small sample size. The 0-9 that's coming at some point is, you know, maybe is a small sample size. Anyway, I don't know. What should I do? How should I do it? Should I just get over it? Am I the only one who's sort of an insane person here when it comes to, you know, sports betting and all of that sort of thing? I don't know. Anyway.
Well, I think that there is a wise man that once told me that's what the money's for. meaning like, hey, yeah, these things happen. And hey, you get back on the horse, you put out the wins. When the wins come, we celebrate them. When the losses happen, we try to get better the next time around. There's going to be times where, you know, I post my random nights where I'm just sitting back, maybe pouring myself a drink, and I'm going to hit a Leafs win by 2, my Leafs Waves bet, right? Which is just Leafs win by 2, Austin Matthews anytime goal, let's roll. And it hits, and people are like, oh, you're amazing, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, I'm just having fun.
No, I make this bet all the time.
Yes, right? and
my
fun.
System is if I'm watching the game, this is the bet that I'm going to make. That's your system.
And hey, guess what? Austin Matthews scores a lot of goals, right?
Yeah. So, it's not a bad bet by any means.
No. Right. But the point I'm making, though, right, is that if people who watch the content, and you're talking about the real people, right? If they can't decipher the difference between those picks that get put out, and then when we're sitting there before a game, and I'll do this all the time, I'll be watching a game or a live bet, right? Where it's like, we'll put out, hey, the Steelers are now -3, or no, what was it? It was Chiefs are now -3.5. Yeah. I feel like the whole world should be betting all their money, right? Like if the people watching, we hope that at this point, the people that are watching and listening and following are able to decipher those things and just take the wins when you can, because that's all we're doing. Take the wins where you can. You can't account for what's going to happen. There are times like last night, I looked at the NBA sched. There's only 3 games last night. I'm like, why are the Suns only 2.5-point favorites on the road in Dallas? I'm like, Dallas isn't that good. Like, they're I understand they're on a nice run. Let's be serious. Who the hell's Dallas? Like, Dallas isn't that good. And guess what happens? The Suns pull away late. They win the game. I didn't post the pick, but I felt real comfortable about it. And as a wise man once said, that's what the money's for. Right?
That's right. Yeah.
So I hear you, man. We do what we can. You've handed out how many winners and prop bets and all these things that have added to the enjoyment. And that's all we can do, my dude. That's it.
I know. I know. You're right. I know. Just, man of the people, I guess. I don't know. Whatever. Can we talk Saturday? We going to do some Saturday numbers here real quick before we go? Can we turn the music on?
It's already on. I hear the music. Just go. Bring us home. We got some time left here. We got a little bit of time left here.
A little bit of time left.
Just magically goes out. But yes,
the music didn't get to my ears. That's on me. As you know, basically we just go into the top 25 and we talk about the market rating, my number, and because we don't know what the point spread is going to be. It's Friday morning. We don't have an official point spread, so we just kind of go, here are the numbers. What would we play it to? That sort of thing. So the big game of the day, SEC, Kentucky and Auburn here. My number is Auburn by 4. The market right now, because of the credit that the UK is getting here, has it closer to -1. I imagine this number is going to be closer to 4. If it's anything below 4, I'll be on Auburn in that game. LSU, Tennessee. Speaking of the SEC, we're going to go sort of conference by conference here. Another sort of ranked on ranked games. Big day in the SEC here. LSU and Tennessee. My number is 4.5 for Tennessee at home. The market rating is 6.5. For Tennessee. This could be a real rock fight type situation here. So if it's anything close to the market rating at 6.5, I will be taking the underdog LSU in that game. The Big 12. All the Big 12 is just ranked teams, basically, right? Like all 5 games are at least qualify as a top 25, not matchup necessarily, but having a top 25 team. West Virginia and Texas Tech, my number is 7. The market number I would expect is 9. So act accordingly there. Again, right, if it's 9, that's the market expectation. That's fine. My number is 7, so we would take the underdog. If the number is 7, that's a stay away. If the number is lower than 7, I would take the favorite, right? I would take Texas Tech -5 because I think, again, based on the numbers, that they win that game by 7. Oklahoma State and Texas here, no confusion when it comes to my number, and the market number. Both are at 10. The fun part is that means we still could make a bet. If the number is lower than 10, we would be on Texas. That's where I would think that this might go. If the number is considerably higher than 10, I will be on Oklahoma State. Baylor and Oklahoma. I've got Baylor as 6.5-point favorites on the road here. The market expectation is something a lot lower than that. I might be Baylor on the road again. Got away with one. Not the one that I did bet, but the one night that I did put the plays out. On Tuesday, we started with a Baylor road victory, -6.5 at West Virginia there. So we'll try our hand again if this number is really low for the Baylor Bears on the road against Oklahoma. TCU and Iowa State, 6s across the board for me. If it's higher than 6, take the underdog. If it's lower than 6, take the favorite. Kansas and Kansas State, not that far off here. My number is 7. The market number is 6.5. You know what to do. Higher, take Kansas State. Lower, take Kansas. Again, by at least sort of a point or so, right? If it's like a half-point difference, that's not really enough for me to want to make a bet. Nebraska and Ohio State, I'm here to tell you, Nebraska is not the ranked team, though shout out to them for covering on Monday. Ohio State certainly is. 19 is my expectation here. My number is 17. Again, play that accordingly. Always a diminishing return situation with point spreads that high. Syracuse and Duke, not as exciting as it once was. My numbers are pretty equal here. My number is 14.5. My market expectation number is 14.5. Play that one accordingly. I think you might be able to get a decent price on Duke based on, obviously Syracuse branding, and they had a big win earlier this week. USC and Utah. I'm shouldn't say always, but I'm going to sort of favor the home underdog in this case. At least my numbers are going to. The market expectation here is USC -6.5. I have this closer to 4. So again, if we get at or around that number of 6.5, maybe there's a 6, maybe there's even a 5.5. I think I would still play Utah at home in that one. UCLA and Colorado. 6.9 is my number, market expectation. So the spread that I would expect it to be based on previous spreads is 6. Not that much of a discrepancy. That's actually a good thing, right? When my numbers are the same as what I think the market should be, and the number actually ends up being off. Let's say UCLA is an 8-point favorite, a 9-point favorite, something like that, right? At least I have 2 numbers that back up the concept of taking the underdog there. Villanova and Georgetown, my number 11.5. The market number, the expected point spread, if you will, is 13 for Nova on the road. Georgetown is a sketchy proposition at this point. The numbers are all out of whack. The ratings are all out of whack. Be very careful anytime you're playing that. ECU and Houston here. This is tricky because Houston, I don't really know what to make of their metrics based on the fact that, they were without 2 of their top guys from when they may have built these metrics. So again, my numbers are often going to have Houston much higher than the market rating. And ECU has been playing pretty well. So I've got Houston as a 21-point favorite in this game at home against ECU. Market says probably closer to 13, and I can't really disagree with where, that the number's probably closer to 13, that it certainly is to mine. So I've been a little bit hesitant. There's been a couple of times where I've laid it with Houston and sort of survived it. One more. No, we don't have any more because Gonzaga is not playing. So a handful of other games, obviously. I will include those in my tweet on Saturday. Hopefully it is not 9 games below 500 on Saturday. And hopefully one way or another we have a decent day. Whatever that ends up entailing for what should be a really fun sports weekend.
My dude, so much action going on between college basketball and, of course, the NFL playoffs continuing as we look to continue to build on all of the winners over the past few weeks. Mr. Matt Russell, thank you so much for joining us and bringing us the whole grain goodness of information and education that you do each and every week. Thanks, my dude.
Thank you, brother.
Thanks to Matt for coming on the pod. And if you want to follow me online, you can do so on Instagram at Sheldon Alexander and on Twitter at Shell Alexander. Don't forget to like and subscribe to DRF Sports Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also rate us, review us, like us, all that other fun stuff. But for more from this new project from DRF Sports, just a little reminder. If you're unfamiliar with the letters DRF, it stands for Daily Racing Forum, which has been around for over 100 years, giving you all of the horse racing information, data, and analysis. But now we've taken over the entire sports world. So if you want coverage on every football game, as well as the NBA, MLB, college sports, and more, head to drf.com/sports for all of the details and insights, as the site has all of the data on every game, including offensive and defensive stats, betting angles, line movements, key injuries, team stats, and more. The DRF data is what powers our power trends. So if you want to see which trends our analysts have selected, follow us on Instagram and on Twitter. If you want access to all of the raw data, drf.com/sports. That's where you can find the usual previews as we deep dive into the games. And of course, we got you covered on this podcast. However you want your betting information, we've got you covered. Again, my name is Sheldon Alexander. We do this podcast twice a week on Tuesdays and on Fridays. That's all I got for now. But until next time, see ya.
Thanks for listening to the DRF Sports Podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show. For more sports betting advice, go to drf.com/sports and follow on Twitter at DRF_sports.